So we got another. I mean, I think we're full with like kind of crazy news today, as we are probably are every day in America. And so we also have the story about a teen who was just released from jail after an alleged racist attempt to drowning at Cape Cod Pound. And it says the allegation that a white teenager held a black child underwater in a racially motivated attack while another white child looked on and laughed has caused consternation, well, at the very least, consternation in Chatham, Massachusetts. It says that 14-year-old white boy, I said white boy, I didn't say white boy, a 14-year-old accused of trying to drown a black youth in a racist attack on Cape Cod. Pond was released from custody to his father Monday at a court appearance. John Sherman was indicted by grand jury on charges of attempted murder and
They
assault with a
named
dangerous.
him. Wow.
Yeah. A pair of youths were seen pushing another into water at a Cape Cod pond in July. According to court documents, the alleged victim, who is black, told investigators that the other child laughed and called him George Floyd as
Oh,
Sheeran repeatedly dunked him into the water, even though the alleged victim said he couldn't swim and needed to wear a life jacket. Sheeran and the other child are both white, the authorities have said. Two witnesses, other youths who were at the pond, told investigators they saw Sharon atop the victim in the water. One said they heard someone say George Floyd as well, according to statements they gave to police that were obtained by NBC. Sharon was indicted by Barnstable County grand jury in August and ordered held without bail after a dangerousness hearing. He was placed in the custody of the Department of Youth Services. His lawyers argued Monday that he should be released pending trial. The judge agreed, ordering conditions including GPS monitoring, staying with his father, reporting to probation regularly, and staying away from potential witnesses in the case. Um, and it says that they reached out to his lawyer for comment. The lawyer told the paper that the charges are over the top for what amounted to horseplaying that
oh,
got out of control. He said he was appealing to the Superior Court to have Sheehan released. And it says all the people involved are juveniles, as all the witnesses, and all but Sheeran had their names redacted from the report. Sheeran's name has not been redacted as he's being tried as a youthful offender. So no, I'll stop there. So this is another crazy story about something that assume still happens a lot, and we don't hear the stories always. But when they reach national news for various reasons, they are obviously worth talking about because we're talking about a 14-year-old kid who obviously did, he didn't get this out the blue. He didn't just wake up one day. This is something that, as racism is taught, not only through society, but through families and interactions about what's acceptable and what's okay. And the fact that these 14-year-olds even know, not only who George Floyd is, but know to, in their mind, to use it in such a racialized way as they're literally dunking somebody underwater. One of them is dunking somebody underwater, speaks volumes about what's going on in the society. It continues to go on.
there was a similar case out west, and chat help me. I can't remember if it was Utah or Nevada, where a middle schooler, a black middle schooler, was choked by a white classmate via a belt, like put like a belt around the kid's neck and was trying to choke him while hollering out George Floyd. Like I can't understand why white children are still being socialized in this way, but I guess it's not a departure from the way that they've always been socialized, that violence against non-whites is okay even if you harm slash kill them, because it's still a recent phenomenon for white folks to be charged under the law with harming or killing black people. Like the majority of the country's history, it was not against the law to kill black folks. So it's sad, but it's very on brand. It's not shocking at all that white children are still behaving in this way with targeted racial violence. And especially, I don't know what kind of area Chatham, Massachusetts is. I don't know how it breaks down racially, but it would lead me to believe that there's got to be majority white, and we know that New England
Yes.
is not a stranger to anti-black racism for sure.
Yeah, it is majority white. I lived in Maine for about 3 or 4 years in South Portland, so I'm real familiar with New England, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm reading it, and I don't know. I have a lot of complex thoughts. Not that it's not a racist attack, obviously it is, but then I do question the attempted murder for a 14-year-old. Is there a way to overturn those sort of backwards ideas in white children at that age? Is that a possibility? Because they're not adults, right? So obviously, everything that they are doing, they are getting from somewhere, as you noted, right? This is not, I don't think that these are ideas that are sprung up organically to be racist, to call out George Floyd. I think that these are things that are probably encouraged in the household and the community. So what does it look like to overturn those backwards ideas? And I don't necessarily think that that is our position or our job to take on, but I do question it, because if it was a Black child that had a 14 years old attempted murder, that's still my same opinion, you know. That's strong for a child that I think, you know, their frontal lobe and they're still growing and still learning. And so what is the age where we say at this point there's no resolve and no resolution? And this, I don't even think this is an abolitionist argument. I'm just looking at it in terms of how do we go about moving towards safety, and we're thinking about community control. What does that look like to protect our children? And then what does the repercussions look like when we're protecting our children from other children? So for me, it's a bit complex. It's still something that I'm processing as I'm reading it real time. So I don't really have like a concrete answer to give, but those were just my initial thoughts about how do we deal with children, because this is a youth issue that's coming on, and there is a particular violence that's happening within the youth that mirrors what we're seeing, and they grow out of that, right? So if we isolate these children, these white children, do they have the potential to become then the ones that are walking into grocery stores and shooting us up? Like, how does that get actually dealt with? And I don't know if attempted murder charges deals with that, as opposed to just putting those children somewhere. I don't think it deals with the actual root issue. So I'm just, a little in my head about it.
I mean, which makes sense because so when I heard that he was charged with attempted murder just now, but for one, I was a little surprised, not at the extent of the charges, but the fact that they named the child. He's still being charged as a youth. He's not being charged as an adult. And usually kids who are charged as juveniles, they don't get their names published in the news. So I'm wondering if it had to have been intentional, but is that the state's way of preemptively fumbling this case, like by honestly unfairly naming this child in the press? Is that biasing a potential jury against it? I don't know. So I find that a little interesting and unusual. But to hear this white kid charged with all these things, especially considering what he is accused of doing, I can't help but to feel like, well, good. Charge him with all that shit, because if he was Black, he'd have been charged as an adult with probably with more charges, especially if it was deemed to be racially motivated, right? The system is not going to have Black folks or Black children, anybody Black, targeting white folks for racialized violence, especially in the light of what allegedly happened. But it's like, how can I get over that, Ricky? Because it's like I don't want anybody, I suppose, to be subjected to the system. But if we subjecting Black kids harshly to the system, then I think the white kids can get some harsh treatment occasionally, like they occasionally do, maybe in this case.
Right. And that's not my argument. Is more so not even Black children attacking white children, like Black children and Black children, like interracially, how that pans out, right? So I'm not saying that, and again, this is not an abolitionist argument, because I don't really consider myself one today. I wouldn't say that I am. But what I am questioning is what exactly are we trying? Are we actually trying to overturn these ideas, or are we trying to isolate the people that have them? Because the isolation of those ideas does not serve us either. That breeds more of those ideas, especially if we can't monitor it. We don't know what's going on. but I'm not making an argument for the child per se, or saying that, you know, what they did or didn't do, or the alleged, not the alleged, they actually, you know, it was attempted murder. I'm not making the
It's
argument.
still alleged. He hasn't been
Right,
convicted. You can still say alleged.
right. So I'm not making the argument about whether that's right or wrong, right? It's not a moral argument. I'm just questioning, at what point do we actually address the backwards ideas that are springing out of the youth? It's reactionary ideas, and it's not subjected to just white children, but how do we deal with it in a totality? Do we just isolate and then move on, all the bad people? So that's why I said I have a lot of complex thoughts as I'm processing it. But then also, I don't know if it's actually tit for tat. It never plays out tit for tat. We are always going to get the worst end of the stick. It's never going to be equitable. It's never going to be even. So even seeking justice on that playing field, or trying to seek justice on equal terms, I think, is misleading on how we can even understand justice in the system. I don't think we'd ever get justice in the system. So seeking for it to be a tit for tat, I think maybe a misdirection of how we actually resolve a lot of these issues. But I'm just thinking out loud.
No. I mean, I think it's an interesting. Because usually, our human reaction is like, yeah, punish that mother, like punish them fast, like, you know what I mean, like, and it does make sense. I think even in terms of our own training, of like, at this stage, the criminal justice system has worked so far against us. If it seemingly, at least on the surface, is attempting to put a charge on that discourages other people from acting in the same way, then that could potentially be a good thing. But you're right, because the way the system is, in general, it's not like it's ever going to teach itself to sort of solve these issues, right? It's not like this is not going to happen next week, the week after, 3 days later, 4 days later. And again, for the most part, I'm assuming these kids don't get punished. I'm assuming this stuff happens in America all the time. And people either are happy to get away in terms of escaping from these incidents. I think in youth culture, there's like certain sort of dangerous aspects, like you said, even intraracial, and folks, with their own communities and stuff like that, when things happen and folks try to get away and deal with it in their head and not necessarily even know how a larger society or so-called authority is supposed to handle this to make it better or whatever like that. So yeah, and I've never considered myself, I don't consider myself necessarily an abolitionist quite yet, but I feel like I'm getting closer to it. But the idea of restorative justice in some way makes sense to me, but I'm certainly not of the ilk of like, sometimes there's folks who talk about like the community should decide punishment. And so I'm not of that ilk, because I think punishment has to have some sort of baseline, which seems fair across, because one community might decide to chop somebody's hand off and another community might decide to just have them sit down and have a conversation or something like that. So all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, and again, no easy answers. I do prefer, in terms of how society works right now, like, yes, that there are charges and that this is being put out there and that folks see or can talk about or hear how dangerous this is, or what the consequences can be for doing this kind of behavior. And I think part of that is because we don't have any easy answers as to, in this particular society, the chances of reforming the larger racial attitudes seem to be nil. And so not
have
quite
people
sure.
tried? I don't even think there's been a real effort, and not on our part. Again, I don't think it's any. I don't think there's any job for us, but I don't think white people have ever tried to overturn.
No, I agree, because they don't want to try.
Yeah,
because
they're
white. It's like, yeah. And like Kim was saying, it's even new that they're getting even punished for it. So some white folks probably sitting there going like, maybe not the same argument you're making, but like, why such harsh charges for like the horseplay argument, right? That the lawyer's making. So I think that's going to be their natural inclination, is like, he was only black, you know what I mean? Or something that in their mind is like, this is going too crazy, or this is woke justice. There's all these things that are going to be fed to them, but they feed to themselves. to justify behavior. And like you said, it hasn't been tried. And in my estimation, of course, it won't be tried within the current formation of how America is structured and the so-called criminal justice system, and what white supremacy is and what capitalism is. I think the society has already failed. Obviously, we've already, for centuries on that issue, and it's not going to be any solution to it in that way. But I think the larger solution is, how do we protect our kids? How do we only have them around folks that we think are going to be kind, considerate? But even when things do happen, how do we work out ways in which there is a sense of justice that maybe does not lead to somebody being locked away for 20 years and only facing more dangers, because the places where they're being locked away from or locked away into are not exactly paradigms of rehabilitation, right? They're just going to learn, like you said, other things, fall in with other crowds, start with the white the Nazi tattoos and all the rest of it for them. So it's not like these places do anything to rehabilitate. They just continue keeping this stuff going, as they were either meant to be, or people are just accepting as how they are and they don't want to do anything about it.
And then they get released back into society. Mm-hmm. But no, I'm not making a moral argument, but I guess I'm more or less trying to think through the power dynamic. Like, what power do we have to even protect our children? What power do we even have to define what justice looks like? Because I don't know. It just reads wild to hear. I mean, even in the context of African children, to hear 14 years, to see it in print, 14 years old, attempted murder charges. Yeah. So that's, yeah.